No! Please!
If this happened in your neighborhood today, there would be a police report, a brother in handcuffs, and a father facing charges for the cover-up. But this happened 3,000 years ago, inside the house of the most celebrated king in the Bible. And it's still sitting there, word for word, in a chapter most sermons quietly skip. 2 Samuel 13. No filters, no softened translation, just a locked door, a young woman's pleas that nobody answered, and a brother who forced himself on her and then threw her out into the street like garbage. Her name was Tamar, the only daughter of King David the Bible ever calls by name. The one who did this to her was Amnon, her own brother, David's firstborn son. David himself, the king, the man all of Israel trusted to judge right from wrong, heard exactly what his son had done. He had every power to punish it. He chose silence instead, because Amnon was his favorite. That alone would make this the darkest chapter in David's story. But it isn't even the part that should stop you cold. Before Amnon touched her, Tamar spoke 4 separate arguments: legal, social, political, personal, laid out in real time while she was still fighting to stop what was happening to her. Buried inside the original Hebrew is a single word the Bible uses in only one other place in the entire book. And once you find out where that other place is, you will never read this story the same way again. Her own father sent her into that room, never knowing he was sending her straight into a trap. Her full brother, Absalom, learnt what happened and told her to stay quiet and move on. And when it was finally over, the text describes what was left of her with the exact same word Scripture uses for cities burned to the ground. Desolate, not for a season, but for the rest of her life. None of it stayed contained in that one room. What happened to Tamar lit the fuse for a murder, a coup, an exile, and a civil war that tore David's family apart from the inside out. This is her story, told in full, exactly as it's written. Tamar's tragedy. Her own brother violated her. Then the killing began. David's family tree didn't look like a family tree. It looked like a map of political alliances, with children attached. Tamar sat at one of those alliance points. 2 Samuel chapter 3 names her mother as Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur, a small Aramean kingdom just east of the Sea of Galilee. That same woman was also the mother of David's son Absalom. David hadn't married into that family for love. He'd married Maacah the way he built most of his kingdom, through calculation. That single marriage made Tamar something rare in Israel. A princess through her father's crown, and granddaughter to a foreign king through her mother royal blood, running in 2 directions at once. On paper, that made her almost untouchable. Her marriage was never going to be a private matter, settled between 2 families. It was a matter of state, weighed, negotiated, watched by half the kingdom before it ever happened. But before any of that mattered, the text pauses to tell us one more thing about her. 2 Samuel 13 verse 1 calls her Yafa, beautiful. It's the exact same Hebrew word Scripture uses for Sarah, for Rachel, for Esther. In the Bible, that word is never just a compliment. It's a warning label. Every time a woman gets called Yafa, something is about to go badly wrong for her. By now, David's children, born to different mothers in different years, back in Hebron, were all grown, all living under one roof in Jerusalem. And this time, the danger wasn't coming from outside the palace walls. It was already living inside them. His name was Amnon, David's firstborn son, born to Ahinoam of Jezreel, the oldest of all David's sons, the one everyone in Israel assumed would sit on the throne after his father. He'd grown up watching David rule an entire nation, and grown up believing, the way firstborn sons of kings usually do, that there wasn't much in that kingdom he couldn't eventually have. Somewhere along the way, what Amnon wanted stopped being the crown. It became Tamar, his own sister. If you were a princess in that court, raised to know your marriage belonged to the kingdom before it belonged to you, how much of your own life would really be yours to keep? And if you were the man raised to believe he could eventually have anything inside those palace walls, what happens the day anything means someone he was never allowed to touch? Court physicians in Jerusalem could handle fevers, infected wounds, the ordinary injuries of a soldier's life. What they couldn't treat walked into Amnon's chambers morning after morning and refused to leave. An obsession with his own sister that was making him physically ill. What medicine exists for a want like that? Second, Samuel doesn't soften it. Amnon was so tormented over Tamar that he made himself sick, and then the text adds the detail that turns his torment into something colder than heartbreak. He couldn't have her because she was a virgin of the royal house, kept behind attendants and separate quarters built for exactly this purpose. Read that carefully. His problem was never his conscience. It was access. If the only wall between Amnon and his sister had been something other than logistics, this story might have stayed one verse long instead of consuming the rest of the book. Scholars who've spent careers in this Hebrew, Robert Alter among them, make the same point. What Amnon felt was never love. Love wants someone's good. Amnon wanted Tamar the way a man wants something behind glass in a locked case. And men who want things like that don't usually stop to ask permission. They look for someone to help them break the glass. He found that someone inside his own family, his cousin Jonadab, son of David's brother Shimea, raised in the same royal household, close enough to the crown prince to walk into his private rooms unannounced, noticed what nobody else seemed to. The king's oldest son was wasting away for no medical reason anyone could name. So he asked why. Scripture has exactly one word for the kind of man Jonadab was: chakam. It's the same root behind Solomon's wisdom a few chapters later, except here it's pointed in the opposite direction entirely. Cleverness, with no conscience attached to it, isn't wisdom. It's just intelligence for hire. Amnon told him everything. I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. A different cousin hears that confession and ends it on the spot. Tells him it's forbidden, tells him to bury the thought, tells him this ends in that room, and goes no further. Jonadab did the opposite. He built a plan. Here's how good the plan was. Take to your bed, he said. Pretend to be sick. When your father comes to check on you, and David always came to check on his sons, ask for Tamar by name. Tell him you can't eat unless she makes the food herself, in front of you, so you can take it straight from her hands. Every piece of that plan does exactly one job. The illness pulls David into the room. David's love for his children gets Tamar assigned to the case. Her own obedience walks her through the door, and a direct order from the king is the only thing in that entire palace with enough authority to send a virgin princess into a man's private chamber without a single person asking why. When David walked into that sick room, a father worried about a child he loved. Amnon didn't improvise a single word of it. He delivered Jonadab's script exactly as written, and it worked instantly. If you'd been the one standing in David's place that morning, would anything about that request have struck you as strange? It didn't strike David as strange. He'd made almost this same move himself once before when he sought to take Bathsheba, wanting something, and finding a way to have it delivered to him. Nathan had already warned him where that kind of taking would eventually lead trouble rising from inside his own house. Nobody in that room that morning seemed to remember it. So David sent for her himself. "Go to your brother Amnon's house," he told Tamar, "and make him something to eat." No question about why Amnon wanted her specifically, and not any of the dozens of servants in that palace. No escort assigned. No hesitation. Just a father, acting in good faith, sending his daughter exactly where his son wanted her to be. And Tamar raised her whole life to obey the king without needing a reason when... Picture the room. Jerusalem at midday. Light cutting low through narrow windows. That particular quiet of a house pretending to be a sick room. Tamar in the ornamented robe every unmarried daughter of the king wore, kneading dough with her own hands for a brother. She had no reason to distrust. The cakes she was making were called levivot, built from the same Hebrew root as lev heart. Whether that's coincidence or the narrator's idea of a cruel joke is something scholars still argue about. What isn't up for argument is this. Tamar believed she was in that room to take care of her brother. Amnon believed he was in that room for something else entirely. And somewhere between the kneading and the baking, one of them was about to find out exactly how wrong she was. By verse 9, Amnon has stopped playing sick. He's playing chess. Tamar carries the tray over and sets the food in front of him. The same cakes she just baked with her own hands, right there, with the attendants still standing around the room. He looks at it and pushes it away. Not hungry after all, apparently, or that's the excuse, because it buys him exactly what he wants next. Send everyone out. And the room empties. Servants, attendants, whoever else had been standing there, gone, without a second thought, because a prince's word was a prince's word. If you'd been one of those servants, told to leave a sick prince alone with his own sister, would anything about that order have made you pause? Nobody in that room did. Why would they? He was the king's son. She was his sister. On paper, nothing about that sentence should have needed a second thought. With the room finally empty, Amnon makes his last move. He doesn't ask Tamar for anything new. He tells her to pick up the very cakes he just refused and carry them somewhere else entirely. Into the chamber, his private bedroom, away from the outer room where she'd just been baking and serving in full view. No windows facing the street. No servants within earshot. No path out that didn't run straight past him. This is the moment the door actually closes. Tamar still had no reason to be afraid. He was her brother. He was supposedly ill. Her own father had sent her here. Up to that exact second, everything she'd done was simply what a good daughter, a good sister, was expected to do. Then she stepped inside, and every assumption she'd walked in with turned out to be wrong. He grabbed her. "Come," he said. "Lie with me." What Tamar does next is the part almost nobody preaches on, because most retellings jump straight from the threat to the tragedy, as if a victim's own voice doesn't belong in her own story. It does. Picture being exactly where she was, physically overpowered, completely alone, no one coming to help, with nothing left to fight with, except your own words. Most people freeze in that moment. Tamar didn't. In the space of maybe 30 seconds, she built 4 separate arguments against what was about to happen to her. The first was legal. "No, my brother, don't force me. Nothing like this is done in Israel. Don't commit this outrage." She wasn't only pleading, she was citing law, and citing it precisely, naming the violation out loud to the man about to commit it. It's worth knowing that some of Israel's neighbors didn't share that law. Egypt's own royal house, for instance, married siblings inside its ruling family. As a matter of course, Tamar's point cut exactly there. Whatever the surrounding nations allowed, Israel didn't, and Amnon knew that better than anyone. The second argument was about what came after. For her, where could I ever carry this shame? In that world, a woman's entire future ran through her marriageability, and a woman known to have lost her virginity outside marriage had no road back into that world. Not a smaller life, a finished one. Tamar wasn't being dramatic. She was stating a fact about the society they both lived in, and asking her own brother to weigh her whole future against whatever he was feeling in that moment. The third argument turned the mirror on him. And you'd become like one of the outrageous fools of Israel. The word she chose was Nabal. Anyone in that court would have caught the reference instantly. It's the same word used for Nabal, the wealthy, arrogant man in 1 Samuel who insulted David's messengers and collapsed in shock. Days later, when he realized how close his own refusal had come to getting his whole household killed. His name had already become shorthand for disgrace. Tamar was telling the heir to Israel's throne that this single act would cost him his reputation, his name, quite possibly the crown itself. And when none of that worked, she offered him a door out. Please speak to our father. He won't refuse you me. It's the only one of the 4 built on hope instead of warning, and scholars still argue over whether Tamar meant it literally or was simply buying herself a few more seconds. The law of Moses didn't actually permit that marriage, and Tamar very likely knew it. Some read that final line less as a real proposal and more as a desperate woman reaching for any sentence that might make him stop and think, even for a moment. Four argument. Law, her own future, his future, and a way out that would have cost him nothing but patience. In under a minute, Tamar built a case most trained advocates would be proud of for a man who had already decided not to listen to any of it. He didn't listen. That's the whole of it. He was physically stronger than she was, and he used that strength to take what 4 brilliant arguments couldn't stop him from taking. The Hebrew verb used here is ana, to force, to crush someone under your own will. It's the exact same verb Genesis uses for what a man named Shechem did to Jacob's daughter Dinah generations earlier. 2 women, centuries apart, described with the same brutal word. Scripture doesn't linger here, and this won't either, not because the truth is too much to say, but because the point was never the act itself. The point is what happens in the minutes right after, what Amnon does the instant it's over, and how differently every person who claims to love Tamar responds once they learn the truth. That part of the chapter is still ahead, and it may be the most disturbing turn in the whole story. Whatever Amnon felt walking into that chamber, it didn't survive contact with what he actually did. Second, Samuel puts a number on it. In its own way, the hatred Amnon felt for Tamar afterward was greater than the love he'd claimed for her before. Read that twice. Not equal. Greater. The very thing he'd made himself sick over, the thing he'd built an elaborate scheme to obtain, disgusted him the moment he actually had it. That reversal tells you what his love actually was, retroactively, all the way back to the beginning. Real love doesn't flip into contempt the second it gets what it wanted. What flips like that is desire, the need to possess something specifically because it was forbidden. There's a pattern. Therapists have a clinical name for today. Idealize first, devalue after. Once the fantasy collides with an actual person who isn't an object, the text never uses that language. It doesn't need to. It shows you the entire arc in a single sentence, 3,000 years before anyone had a name for it. Then Amnon does something almost more chilling than the assault itself. He speaks to her again, not by name, not as his sister, just 2 flat words. Get up. Go. Tamar doesn't leave quietly. She argues with him a second time, and what she says next is easy to misread if you don't know the law she's quoting. Sending me away now, she tells him. is a worse wrong than what you already did to me. Read only with modern eyes. That sentence sounds impossible. Read inside the actual law of that world. It's cold, precise reasoning. Deuteronomy 22 and Exodus 22 both contain a provision almost nobody preaches on. If a man forced himself on an unmarried woman, he became legally bound to marry her, pay her father, and lose the right to ever divorce her for the rest of his life. Strange as that looks by modern standards, inside a society with no other safety net for a woman in her position, it was the one guarantee left to her: a household, a name, a place to belong for the rest of her life. Amnon had just taken the crime and its only legal remedy in the same 5 minutes. And once again, the chapter repeats the exact same 4 words it used 2 verses earlier. He would not listen to her. Twice, in the same story before the assault, and after it. That repetition isn't an accident. Hebrew narrators used repetition deliberately, and this one is doing something close to screaming through the page. This woman spoke with intelligence and precision, twice, and neither time did it matter to the one person who could have stopped everything. He calls a servant and gives one final order: put this woman out and bolt the door behind her. Listen to what's missing. 5 minutes earlier, she was my sister. Now she's this woman not even worth naming. And the door doesn't just close, it bolts, as if she's the danger being kept out, rather than the one who just survived something inside. Here's the detail promised back at the start of this story. Verse 18 describes what Tamar was wearing that day. A long, richly sleeved robe, the specific garment reserved for unmarried daughters of the king. In Hebrew, ketonet pasim. That exact phrase, those 2 words together, appears in only one other place in the entire Hebrew Bible, Genesis 37:3, describing the coat Jacob gave his son Joseph, the coat of many colors. Sit with that for a second. Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers, stripped of that coat, sold into slavery, and Jacob, shown the coat soaked in blood, tore his own clothes and mourned a son he believed dead. Now Tamar, betrayed by her own brother, tears that same style of coat with her own hands, mourning a life that just as surely died that day. 2 households, 2 betrayals dressed in the exact same rare fabric, torn twice over, once by a grieving father, once by the woman living the second tragedy herself. And in both stories, the father who heard the news afterward could do nothing that actually reversed the damage. The narrator didn't reach for that phrase by accident. Whoever wrote this chapter wanted you to feel, physically, that what happened inside David's house was every bit as grave as what happened inside Jacob's. Tamar tears that robe herself. She pours ashes over her head, the same gesture used for mourning the dead, because in every way that mattered, something in her had just died. She puts her hand on her head, a gesture ancient Near Eastern art shows again and again as a sign of total devastation. And she walks out through the palace like that, screaming, ashes falling down her face, her torn robe hanging off her, her cries echoing off stone corridors built for a king. If you'd been a guard standing at your post that morning, watching the king's own daughter walk past you like this, what would it have taken for you to actually do something? Nobody did. Every servant, every guard, everyone in that palace heard her. Not one person stopped her, helped her, or asked what happened. Someone did eventually speak to her, just not the way you'd hope. Her full brother Absalom finds her and asks one question: was it Amnon? Before delivering 3 short lines that do more damage than silence would have. Hold your peace. He's your brother. Don't take this to heart. 3 sentences that sound almost like comfort and function, like 3 locks on a door. Stay quiet. Excuse it because of family. Pretend it mattered less than it did. If those words sound familiar, It's because people still say versions of them today, almost word for word, whenever someone close to them would rather manage the discomfort than face what actually happened. And then the chapter ends her story, for now, with a single Hebrew word that lands like a verdict. Shema. Desolate. It's the same word Isaiah uses for a woman with no husband and no children, and the same root Lamentations uses for Jerusalem itself, leveled after Babylon was finished with it. Scripture doesn't reach for that word lightly. It's reserved for ruined cities, collapsed temples, land that stops producing anything at all, and now it belonged to a woman who 1 chapter earlier had royal blood running through both sides of her family and a marriage that mattered enough to be a matter of state. She lived out the rest of her life in her brother Absalom's house. No husband, no children, no public voice ever again. Word of everything that happened that day eventually reaches one more person, the one man in the entire kingdom who actually had the power to do something about it. What he does next is its own kind of devastating, and it's where this stops being one family's tragedy and starts becoming the whole kingdom. Anger is easy. It costs a king nothing, no political capital, no risk, no consequence. It's the safest emotion a ruler can show in public, precisely because it doesn't obligate him to do anything about it. That's exactly what verse 21 hands us. When David heard what Amnon had done to Tamar, he was furious. The text doesn't hedge, doesn't soften it. Very angry. And then, nothing. No order. No punishment. No summons. The next line simply moves on, leaving a king's justice conspicuously absent from a story that has room for 4-part legal arguments and mourning rituals, down to the last gesture. That silence isn't an accident of the text. It's forcing you to ask the one question everyone inside that palace must have asked. Why? To understand it, you have to see David's court, the way the people living inside it actually saw it not as one family, but as a royal court running on a dozen quiet alliances, each one wearing the face of a child. By this point in his reign, David had married at least 8 women the text names, and every one of them had produced a son with some claim, however distant, to Israel's throne. Picture 8 mothers in that palace, each one watching her own son, each one running the same silent math on how close he sat to the crown. Amnon, the firstborn, belonged to Ahinoam. Chileab, the second son, called Daniel in a later genealogy, belonged to Abigail, the widow of Nabal, and vanishes from the story almost as soon as he's born. He's never mentioned again. Absalom, the third son and Tamar's own full brother, belonged to Maacah, daughter of the king of Geshur. Adonijah, the fourth, belonged to Haggith. The list, according to 2 Samuel chapter 3, kept going from there. Every name on that list meant a different mother, a different set of in-laws, and a different faction doing the same calculation. If David publicly punished Amnon, stripped his standing as heir, or worse, he wasn't just disciplining a son, he was reshuffling the entire line of succession in a single move, and the son who stood to gain the most from Amnon's fall was already sitting in that palace. Absalom, whose grandfather ruled an actual kingdom with its own army, just across the border. David understood exactly what a move like that could ignite, because he'd already lived through it once before he ever ruled a united Israel. He spent roughly 7 years in civil war against the surviving house of Saul fellow Israelites, killing each other over exactly this question. Who gets to wear the crown next? He hadn't clawed his way through that just to hand a rival faction inside his own family the perfect excuse to start it again. So he picked the option that cost him nothing in public and everything in private. He got angry where it was safe to be seen, and he did nothing else where it actually would have mattered. There's a detail here most English Bibles don't even show you. And it changes how this silence reads. The Masoretic text, the standard Hebrew source behind most modern translations, simply ends the verse after very angry and leaves the rest to you. But the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures begun in the 3rd century BC, preserves one more line the Hebrew doesn't have, that David would not punish his son Amnon because he loved him, since he was his firstborn. Many textual scholars think that extra line reflects an older layer of the text that later Hebrew copyists quietly drop. If they're right, it means someone, a very long time ago, looked at David's silence and decided readers needed the truth spelled out underneath it, not caution, favoritism. And here's where the pattern turns genuinely chilling. A little over a year before this exact chapter, the prophet Nathan had stood in front of David, not behind closed doors, face to face, and delivered a verdict straight from God over what David had done to Uriah and Bathsheba. Evil would rise up against him, and it would come from inside his own house. If you were David, sitting in that room a year later, having just learned what your own firstborn son did to your own daughter, how long would it take before that sentence came back to you? Because this isn't only a prophecy landing on schedule. Look at the actual mechanics repeating themselves. When Bathsheba's pregnancy threatened to expose what David had done, he didn't confess. He tried to engineer his way out of it. Recalling her husband Uriah home from the battlefront, then sitting him down for a dinner and getting him deliberately drunk, hoping a homesick, wine-loosened soldier would go sleep with his own wife and let the timing cover everything up. Uriah refused, sober or drunk, out of loyalty to the men still fighting, so David had him killed in battle instead. A generation later, Amnon runs a strikingly similar playbook, just aimed at a different target. He couldn't scheme his way toward Tamar. Directly, she was too well guarded for that. So he schemed against the one person who trusted him without question, his own father. Feigned illness in place of a dinner invitation. A worried king in place of a drunk, homesick soldier. But underneath both plans, the same core move. Manipulate someone who trusts you completely and let their trust do the work you don't want to do yourself. The one real difference between father and son is the thing David eventually had, and Amnon never showed a trace of guilt. This is the part almost nobody mentions when Psalm 51 gets preached as David's great comeback story. Yes, David repented genuinely, in some of the rawest, most honest poetry in all of Scripture. Yes, he was forgiven. Both of those things are true, and neither one undid what was already set in motion. Forgiveness settled David's account with God. It didn't roll back the consequences already loose in his own household, and those consequences didn't politely stay outside the palace walls. They moved in, they sat down at his table, and they started with the one person in that entire family who hadn't done a single thing to deserve any of it. Tamar. What David's silence buys him in this chapter is about to come due, and the interest on it will cost him far more than one hard conversation with his firstborn son ever would have. The debt came due 2 years later, and Absalom had been keeping track of the interest the entire time. Verse 22 tells you exactly how he spent those 2 years. He said nothing to Amnon. Not a kind word, not an angry one, nothing. The text calls it, speaking to him, neither good nor bad, which sounds almost gentle until you realize what it actually describes. Total, deliberate silence, held for 730 straight days, because Absalom hated Amnon for what he'd done to Tamar and had decided that hatred didn't need an audience yet. Think about what that actually looked like in practice. Every feast in that palace, every religious festival, every family gathering where the king's sons sat together at the same table, ate the same bread, drank the same wine. Absalom sat there too, next to the man who'd assaulted his sister, and gave away absolutely nothing. How do you do that for 2 straight years? How do you pass someone the bread and never once let your face show what you're actually thinking? Amnon never picked up on it. He was the firstborn, David's favorite, protected by exactly the kind of royal impunity that had let him get away with everything so far, and that same impunity made him blind to the one person in the palace who'd already decided he wasn't going to get away with it forever. And David, the same king who could read enemy formations from Philistia to Moab well enough to keep winning wars for decades, somehow never noticed 2 years of silence sitting at his own dinner table. He'd built an entire kingdom by understanding what his enemies were planning. He had no idea what was brewing inside his own house. Then, almost exactly 2 years later, the opportunity Absalom had been waiting for arrived on its own. Sheep shearing season at Baal Hazor, roughly 15 miles north of Jerusalem, out past the reach of palace guards and royal oversight. Shearing season meant a harvest-style festival, feasting, music, wine flowing freely, the kind of open celebration where nobody watches the clock too closely. It's worth knowing, this wasn't the first sheep-shearing feast in David's story. Nabal, the same man Tamar had invoked by name 2 years earlier, warning Amnon he'd become just like him through exactly this kind of feast in 1 Samuel, got exactly this drunk on exactly this kind of wine, and it was the last celebration of his life. Whether the narrator meant that echo on purpose is impossible to prove. It's very hard to believe it's an accident. Absalom invited the king. David politely declined, didn't want to be a burden on the household. So Absalom made his real move, the one he'd actually been building toward the entire conversation. Then let my brother Amnon come with us instead. David asked why, mildly puzzled. Absalom pushed. And David, the same father who 2 years earlier sent Tamar into Amnon's chamber without a second thought, sent Amnon off to Absalom's feast the exact same way, without a single question that mattered. Sit with how precisely that mirrors itself. 2 years earlier, Amnon used David's love to deliver Tamar into a trap David never saw coming. Now Absalom uses that same love, that same trusting blindness, to deliver Amnon into a trap of his own. Same father. Some manipulation, same blind spot, exploited twice by 2 different sons for 2 entirely different purposes. Absalom gave his servants one instruction, timed to the minute: watch for the moment. Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I give the signal, strike him down. Don't be afraid I'm giving the order. I'm taking responsibility. Be courageous and valiant. That last phrase should stop you. It's almost word for word what God told Joshua before Israel crossed into the Promised Land's sacred language, meant to steady an army about to do something righteous, repurposed here to steady the hand of a killer. If you'd been one of those servants, hearing your master borrow the language of holy war to order a murder at a family dinner, would the words have made the act feel justified, or would they have felt exactly as wrong as they actually were? The servants did exactly what they were told. In the middle of a feast built on wine and celebration, surrounded by his own brothers, completely unsuspecting, Amnon was killed. Panic broke out instantly. The other sons scattered from the feast in terror, and by the time word reached Jerusalem, the story had grown in the telling. The way terrified rumors always do over a 15-mile ride, Absalom had killed 11. Every one of David's sons, dead. David didn't wait for confirmation. He tore his own clothes and collapsed to the ground, and every servant standing near him tore theirs too, mourning a massacre that hadn't actually happened. Notice what David is doing with his hands in that moment. Tamar tore her robe 2 years earlier, in that same palace, grieving a life that had just been destroyed. and nobody moved to comfort her. Nobody avenged her. Nobody did a single thing. Now David tears his own robe, grieving a catastrophe that grew directly out of his own silence. Same gesture. Completely different outcome in terms of who responds. When Tamar destroyed her garment, the king did nothing. When David destroys his, it's because doing nothing has just come back around to destroy him. That's when Jonadab reappears, the same Jonadab, the architect of the very first trap, the man who designed the scheme that got Tamar alone with Amnon in the first place. He tells David not to worry. It isn't all of his sons, only Amnon, and then he adds something that should turn your stomach. This had been decided by Absalom from the day Amnon violated Tamar. Jonadab had known. For 2 entire years, he had known exactly what was coming, and he said absolutely nothing to stop it. Not to warn Amnon, not to protect anyone, not once. He built the original crime with his own hands, watched 2 years of consequences accumulate in total silence, and only opens his mouth once the blood is already on the ground, to offer a correction to a head count. Of every person in this story, Jonadab may be the hardest to forgive, not for one specific act of cruelty, but for everything terrible he let happen while doing absolutely nothing to stop it. Absalom, run. He fled to Geshur, to his mother's father, King Talmai, the same foreign grandfather who made Tamar's bloodline politically untouchable at the very beginning of this story. He stayed there in exile for 3 years. And chapter 13 ends on a single sentence that tells you everything about where David's heart actually was. His spirit longed for Absalom, the text says, because he had already finished grieving Amnon. Read that closely. David missed his exiled son. David had made peace with his dead one. Now ask yourself, where, in that entire sentence, is Tamar? Nowhere. She isn't in it. David got angry for her once, and did nothing with the anger. He wept for the son who assaulted her. He longed for the son who avenged her, in his own bloody way, without ever once being asked to. And Tamar herself simply stops appearing. After verse 20 of this chapter, she is never mentioned again as an active person anywhere else in Scripture. Not once, not in another book, not in another chapter of her own father's story. The last image the text ever gives us of her is the same one from earlier in this story. Ashes on her face, her royal robe torn, walking screaming through palace corridors where absolutely no one listened. Chapter 13 ends there. But chapter 14 doesn't let the story rest. Pull the camera back far enough, and a locked bedroom door in Jerusalem starts to look like the epicenter of a war. Everything that follows moves fast, because by this point, the pattern is already set, and the text doesn't need to slow down to make its point again. Amnon assaults Tamar. David does nothing. Absalom kills Amnon. Absalom runs to Geshur for 3 years. 2 more chapters go by before Absalom even makes it back into Jerusalem. A general named Joab engineers a scheme to talk David into allowing his exiled son to return, and it works eventually. Absalom comes home, and then David refuses to actually see him. Not for a few weeks. For 2 more full years, father and son live inside the same city walls, and never once speak face to face. Picture that, living in the same city as your own father for 2 years, and not once being allowed to look him in the eye. Add it up: 2 years of silence with Amnon before the murder, 3 years of exile in Geshur, 2 more years of silence after coming home, and this family had now spent the better part of a decade not saying the one thing that actually needed to be said. Once he was back, even without his father's blessing, Absalom found a new project. Every morning, he stood at Jerusalem's gate and caught people who'd traveled there, hoping for the king's justice. and told every single one of them the same thing. Your case is good, your claim is right, but there's no one the king has actually appointed to hear it. You've heard that sentence's twin already. Earlier in this exact story, no one heard her. That was Tamar's whole experience, compressed into 3 words. And now here's her own brother, turning that exact failure into a weapon, converting every person David had failed to govern into a potential ally for himself. The text doesn't dress it up. Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel, one abandoned petitioner at a time. From there, everything accelerates. Absalom declares himself king in Hebron. David, the same man who once took Jerusalem by force and made it his own, has to flee it barefoot and weeping, a fugitive from the city he built. Civil war follows. Thousands of Israelites, men who'd have called each other neighbors a year earlier, kill each other over which of David's sons gets to rule, and Absalom's rebellion ends the way. So much of this story already has, with his own body caught by his hair in the branches of an oak tree, and Joab driving 3 spears through his heart while he hung there, suspended between the ground and the throne he tried to seize. Every part of that, the blood, the exile, the rebellion, thousands of dead soldiers, a father who buried a son he'd once refused to punish, and grieved another he'd once refused to see traces back to one locked room where a man decided his own desire outweighed his sister's dignity. And it kept growing because the one person with enough power to stop it at the very start decided his own political comfort outweighed his daughter's justice. There's one more detail left, and it might be the most quietly devastating thing in this entire story. 2 Samuel 14 verse 27, almost buried inside a routine note about Absalom's children, says this: he had 3 sons and 1 daughter. Her name was Tamar. He named his own daughter after the sister he couldn't save. And the text adds the same descriptive line used all the way back at the start of this story. She was a beautiful woman. Same word, same description. Except this daughter grew up with a father who had already learned, in the worst way anyone could learn it, exactly what that beauty could cost a girl, with no one willing to protect her. Whatever else can be said about Absalom, and there's a great deal to say, he made sure this second Tamar would never share her aunt's fate. Every time anyone in that household said the girl's name, they said Tamar's name. Scripture itself moves past the first Tamar after this chapter, and never brings her back into the story directly. Kingdoms rise and fall, kings die, history keeps moving, the way it always does, indifferent to the people it leaves behind. But her brother made sure her name kept moving too, carried inside a new person, spoken out loud in the same palace that had once gone completely silent exactly when she needed it not to. A king forgot her. A justice system that should have protected her never once moved on her behalf. Scripture spends 1 chapter on her and never fully returns. Not justice. Not the ending anyone would have chosen for her. Just a name, spoken out loud in that family for the rest of its history, long after the one man with the power to actually hear her had already chosen not to. 3,000 years is a long time, long enough that a story like this should feel like an artifact, something to study rather than recognize. It doesn't, and that's the actual point. Tamar spoke first, and she spoke with more legal and moral precision than anyone else in the entire chapter. It didn't matter, because the people who could have acted on what she said chose comfort over her word instead. That failure isn't uniquely ancient. Believing someone the moment it's inconvenient, the moment it implicates someone you love, need, or answer to, is still the hardest version of belief there is. Absalom's exact words to his own sister, "Hold your peace, he's your brother. Don't take it to heart," are still almost unchanged. The 3 sentences most commonly used to quiet victims today: not usually out of cruelty. Usually because keeping the peace inside a family, a team, a church, a company feels easier in the moment than actually confronting what happened. Peace built on someone else's enforced silence was never really peace. It was just delay. And David's silence is the clearest lesson of all. He treated inaction as the safe option, the choice that protected his throne, his family, his reputation. All at once, it cost him almost everything instead. A murdered son, a rebel son, a civil war, a kingdom he nearly lost outright. The accountability anyone avoids now because it's awkward or costly has a way of returning later, bigger, and far harder to contain. None of that makes this story easier to sit with. It makes it worth sitting with if the point is to actually do something differently, not just to feel something while reading it. Go back to where this story started. A locked door, 3,000 years ago, inside a house nobody was supposed to be able to touch. Tamar walked out of that room, tore her own royal robe with her own hands, poured ashes over her own head, and screamed through a palace built by a king who chose his firstborn son's comfort over his only daughter's justice after already saying more true, more precise, more courageous things than most of the men in her own story ever managed. 4 arguments nobody wanted to hear. Scripture didn't blur any of it. It wrote down every plea, word for word. It wrote down every silence that never should have existed in the first place. David's, the moment he heard the truth and did nothing with it. Absalom's, held deliberately for 2 full years. And the silence of an entire palace, full of guards and servants, who heard her screaming through the halls and did nothing at all. None of that made it into Scripture by accident. The Bible was never trying to make anyone comfortable here. It was trying to make you look straight at something most people would rather turn away from, because stories like Tamar's don't stop happening just because nobody's willing to say them out loud. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the parts most sermons quietly skip, told without softening a single verse, subscribing is the simplest way to make sure the next one finds you. And if something about Tamar's 4 arguments, or David's silence, or that one small act of naming a daughter after her stayed with you, say so in the comments. Stories like hers survive because people keep choosing to say them out loud. Thank you for staying with this one all the way to the end, even through the parts that were hard to sit with. That's exactly what Tamar deserved from the people standing around her 3,000 years ago, and it's still what her story deserves now.